Okay, so as Teresa mentioned, please feel free to add some questions as you think of them in the chat. I do have one of my colleagues here with me today, Dr. Priya Pai, who will be helping to answer your questions while I'm giving my presentation, and we will have some time at the end for questions. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into this overview of SBIR STTR proposals. So just a brief introduction of myself. I had my PhD in behavioral neuroscience and did my postdoc work in molecular neuroscience. And I have helped clients write and secure SBIR STTR funding from a variety of agencies ranging from NIH, the VA, and ARPA-H. And so here at EGC, just to give you an introduction into Eva Garland Consulting, the company that I work for, our mission is to advance science, and we do this through a variety of ways. So we do help our clients write and secure non-dilutive funding. And so non-dilutive funding is where you're not losing any portion of your company to like a venture capitalist. We have over 50 PhD level scientific consultants and grant accounting experts. And so at EGC, we also help our clients manage their award funds once they've received them. As you'll see as we get through this and through the series, budgeting and managing your grant money is a very large undertaking, and it becomes a lot more complex versus just like in and out of like daily company budgetary management. And we've been named the fastest growing company by Inc. 5000 for 6 consecutive years. And so we really help our clients from start to finish. So that innovation piece, developing those proposals, winning those proposals, and then helping to manage those awards once they won them. And as you can see, our clients have raised over $1.5 billion in non-dilutive funding. A quick overview of our agenda today. So first, we'll discuss the differences between academic and SBIR STTR grants, and also some of those commonalities. Then we will discuss how to determine project scope for these small business grants. How do you demonstrate commercial potential? What are the responsibilities of the small business? Especially if you are coming from an academic background, there's a lot of moving parts that the university typically takes care of that as the small business, you will then become responsible for managing. And then, as I mentioned, there should be some time at the end for questions and answers. So let's go ahead and jump in. So each year, over $3 billion is set aside by 11 different federal agencies to support the research, development, and commercialization of new innovations. And as we'll get into this, this money is set aside specifically just for small businesses. And each agency has a different amount that they have available. As Teresa mentioned, you'll be receiving these slides, and any of these kind of gold underlined, oh, you guys can't see my mouse. Okay, maybe not. Anything that's gold underlined is a link. So at this link here, you can read a description of what each of these agencies is looking for. And at the SBA website, the Small Business Administration website, it's kind of a reverse pitch. So why would you want to submit an application to one of these agencies? And throughout the year, much like with NIH academic style grants, you have different deadlines throughout the year. And also depends on the mechanism. So specifically for NIH, we have 3 major deadlines for what's called the omnibus solicitation, and those deadlines are September 5th, January 5th, and April 5th every year. And with omnibus, much like a general R01, you can submit whatever project that you're interested in conducting to the NIH. So again, as you can see here, there are multiple deadlines for these different agencies across the year, but keep in mind that not every agency supports both SBIR and STTR funding. And so SBIR is, we'll get into this a little bit later, but SBIR, the small business is more or less it's easier to say what the difference for STTR is. So STTR is where you're partnering with, you're required to partner with a nonprofit research institution, whereas with SBIR, you have the option to, but you're not required to. And there are some budget considerations and also PI considerations that go into that. And we'll delve into these differences a little bit through this presentation, as well as the next one, where my colleague, Dr. Brandon Turner, will discuss the differences in budgeting and considerations for that as well. So for SBIR, STTR funding, there are different stages of development, and this is really in terms of product development. So with a phase 1 project, this is where your project is really at its riskiest. So you're maybe developing your prototype, you might be developing your proof of concept or demonstrating your proof of feasibility. And these are typically come with a lower budget. So here you see between $300,000 to $700,000 for a project that ranges between 6 and 24 months. And again, all of these figures, these budget considerations are really agency and mechanism specific. So something that you'll probably get tired of hearing me say by the end of this is to make sure you're reading the solicitation very carefully to figure out what that given project can support. So once you're done with phase 2, that makes you eligible for, or sorry, when you're done with your phase 1, that makes you eligible for your phase 2, which is more focused on, you've completed that proof of concept, proof of feasibility. Phase 2, there may still be some work to finish for development, but you're more focused also on commercialization and getting market approval or regulatory approval. These projects can range between 24 to 36 months, and they come with a much larger budget, so between $2 to $3 million. And there are, at the NIH, there are what's called budget waiver topics where you may be eligible for a higher budget depending on what your unmet need essentially that you're targeting is. Again, read the solicitation for that specific information. After phase 2, some agencies do offer what's called phase 2B or commercialization readiness pilots. And this is the funds that typically help to support later stage development, later clinical trials, and really here, the award amounts and timelines really vary. And again, it is not offered by all agencies. This is something that NIH does offer. And then this is all to get you to phase 3, where your product or innovation has been commercialized, meaning it is on the market, ready to be sold. At this stage, you're no longer eligible for SBIR funding for that particular innovation. And the idea is that at this stage, you're ready for investor funding or potentially that dilutive funding. Typically for phase 1 projects or innovations that are coming in at the phase 1 stage, the product is very, very risky, very early stage that VC venture capitalists are wary to invest at this stage. So really the SBIR, STTR funding provides that boost in capital for companies to really de-risk their product, their innovation, to make them more attractive for investor funding later. So what makes a competitive application? You really need to have a solution that is targeting an unmet need. For NIH, this is typically some sort of health-related issue. Your solution needs to have significant commercial potential. So in this case, you need to demonstrate that you have a competitive advantage. So why is someone going to choose your innovation over what's currently available? What makes it better or different or unique? Also, team is going to be an important part of this. So you need to demonstrate that the people that you're bringing together to complete this project, know what they're doing, they have that expertise, and they have either in the past done something similar with success, whether that is bringing a drug to market or getting it through regulatory approval, or successfully have run businesses, anything like that. So even though I mentioned that these funding opportunities do target innovations at a really early stage, very risky. And that's typically where startup companies are entering. That may be, again, too early for private investment. Established small businesses may also apply for SBIR STTR funding as long as you're pursuing a new project. So things that are considered incrementally advancing something that's already on the market is typically not funded through SBIR STTR, so it needs to be a brand new idea, brand new product. It can be related to things that a company already has on the market, but it really needs to be a standalone novel innovation. Okay, so let's jump into some of these differences between SBIR STTR grants and an academic grant. And here up in the corner, you'll see the NIH logo, and this means that this is NIH really specific. Again, we're going to be talking about R01. So anytime you see this logo, this is really NIH specific. I am trying to make this as general and broad as possible, but every agency, every mechanism has its own ins and outs that you really need to be aware of. So one of the major differences is eligibility. So for an academic R01 style grant, you have higher education institutions, nonprofit institutions, even for-profit small businesses may apply, but so also can local and federal governments, other entities, and foreign and domestic entities. For SBIR STTR grants, only small businesses are eligible, and they need to be US based. And so this makes them very attractive for small businesses because you have a much smaller competition pool compared to an academic style grant. For R01s, these tend to be discovery driven, so advancing the field of science, whereas SBIR or these small business grants are objective driven. So you're advancing your product, you're advancing your innovation. Typically, we encourage you to think about what do you want your product, your innovation to look like when it hits the market, when it's being purchased by people, and then work backwards from that envisioned product to where you are right now. So what are those steps that you need to take to get from where you are currently to where you want to go for your final product? That leads us into aims. So for an academic grant, because this is discovery driven, you're testing hypothesis, you're really encouraged to have your aims to be independent of each other. Whereas with the small business grants, your aims are very often dependent on each other because they are steps in your product development pathway. You necessarily sometimes need to finish aim 1 in order to get to aim 2 to further your product. You will still want to demonstrate, if this current approach fails, I still have a path forward to aim to. But again, they can be more dependent on each other than you're probably familiar with for an R01. And then finally, R01 milestones tend to be focused on obtaining answers to a broad question, whereas SBIR, STTR milestones need to be quantitative and SMART. And so SMART here means specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. And so, for example, again, we have links here to these are publicly available grants that NIH has published, and these are from the same agency. So on the right, we have a funded grant that has the following specific aims to test a central hypothesis with the results to generate a positive impact towards a new class of targeted treatments. Conversely, for this SBIR application, here we have the project that is furthering the product development and the milestone. We have these very concrete, measurable milestones. And especially for phase 1, these milestones are when you apply for a phase 2, you have to demonstrate whether or not you have achieved these milestones in order to have a strong phase 2 application. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the differences between SBIR versus STTR. So for the SBIR, the Small Business Innovative Research Grant, that again does not require the participation of a nonprofit research partner. STTR, the Small Business Technology Transfer, requires, so you must have a collaborating nonprofit research partner. Typically, this is a university, and typically you'll see university spin-out companies still collaborating with their home university and launching into small business independence after that. Again, I mentioned that there are budgetary differences and considerations. So for example, for an SBIR, again, Brandon in the next webinar of the series will get into these details a lot more in a lot more granular detail, but just high level, for an SBIR, 67% of the budget must go to the company for phase 1. When you get to phase 2, that kind of decreases, so you're allowed to spend 50% of the budget outside of the company. For the STTR, at least 40% of the budget must go to company expenses, 30% must go to the partnering research institution, and then that remaining 30% can be utilized however the small business sees fit, whether that is to support more small business portion of the budget, more partnering research institution portion of the budget, or a completely separate entity. That is up to the small business. That is for the STTR budget requirements, this is not flexible. So you must be meeting these requirements. Whereas for the SBIR, you have a little bit more flexibility, and you should always talk to your PO to discuss that more in depth. Another difference is where primary employment of the PI resides. So for an SBIR, you must have primary employment. So you must be at least 50%, at least like 51% at least with a small business, meaning if you're still employed by your university or outside employment and this is at time of award, not at time of submission, you're going to run into some issues here. However, with the STTR, the PI can either be employed by the small business or the partnering research institution. And then another difference is how much money, and again, this, I should have put NIH here, but at NIH, there's about $1 billion budgeted for SBIR and about 114 million for STTR. There are typically a lot more applications targeting SBIR versus STTR. And so the competitiveness of the two mechanisms really kind of balances out. And so pretty similar in terms of percentage of applications that are funded just based on number received. Okay. So similarities between the review process, and again, this is going to be very NIH specific versus differences. So for the small business review panel, it's going to be about 1/3 academics, 1/3 clinicians, and 1/3 entrepreneurs. And your application really needs to appeal to all three. So academics are going to be looking for that scientific rigor, robust experimental detail, understanding the unmet need. Clinicians will also be looking for that unmet need, but they're also going to be looking for how would they use this in their practice? How would they be reimbursed for it? And entrepreneurs are looking for, is this something that people would actually buy? Or is there an appropriate development plan in place? Does the application demonstrate realistic understanding of the commercial potential, and also whether or not there's a viable business team backing the project? Each review panel is very different, and so here we have a kind of general overview. NIH is very, compared to some of these other agencies, very transparent with their review process. one thing that we do know with NSF is that there are more business people, more entrepreneurs on the review panel. And a very crucial difference is that the program director at NSF participates in the review and can actually go to bat for an application. Whereas with NIH, the PO may participate in the sense that they're present during the review, but they are not speaking up. They're just kind of taking notes. And the program director for NSF also makes those funding recommendations. These other agencies, we strongly recommend that you try to reach out to talk to someone to talk about, to determine your project fit within their priorities, but that can be very difficult compared to, say, NIH. That being said, most all of these agencies will be looking for very similar scoring criteria. What is the significance? What is the unmet need? What is your innovation? How is it different from what is currently available? Investigators, who's part of the team that is conducting this work, do you have the necessary experience? The environment, do you have the necessary materials and resources available to you to conduct what you're proposing? Your approach, is there enough detail for the reviewers to actually review what you're proposing? Does it make sense what you're proposing? Do you have a solid statistical analysis plan? Do you have a solid understanding of when, say, for example, specific aim 1 is complete? Do you have those concrete milestones? And then also, they will be looking for commercial potential. With most agencies, you should receive reviewer notes on the strengths and weaknesses, and it's always a good practice to take the reviewer's comments to heart and bring those into a resubmission if possible. So here we have some examples of NIH review criteria. So overall impact for the small business grant application is that you need to be creating a product to solve this significant unmet need. Versus R01, you're advancing the knowledge. I'm not going to read through all of this so I can keep moving, but again, these slides will be made available and strongly encourage that you read through these as well. So how do you determine project scope between for a small business grant? So as I mentioned earlier, you really want to start by outlining where are you right now and where are you trying to get? And then you want to, again, read through the solicitation, understand what are the restraints that you're working in with regard to timeline and budget, and determine what part of that development pathway can you feasibly get done within those constraints. And so, for example, here we have a sample product development timeline for a device that is being developed. So phase 1 might be prototype optimization and then testing the feasibility. And then in phase 2, 2B, or the commercialization readiness pilot, you're conducting those clinical trials that are necessary to bring the device to market. And so you can kind of think of it as this life cycle of the frog. So you're trying to get from that little cluster of eggs to the fully grown frog. Each of these steps are discrete steps for your product pathway. With each step, as I've mentioned, is very crucial to identify these key metrics that you're gauging your success against. Reviewers will want to know that you understand when a particular step has been successfully completed and you're not just spinning your wheels unnecessarily. So how are you then defining your project? What is your value proposition? What is the unmet need that you're solving? How is your solution unique? What do you need in order to achieve your next R&D milestone? And these details are very important. They're essentially what makes up the grant application. What specific experiments, tests, or designs need to be completed? How are you going to then complete those experiments? How are you going to demonstrate you've achieved your milestone? What are your metrics for success? And then again, also, who is performing the work? So for NIH, these are typically outlined in your specific aims. So you're introducing your problem, that's your significance. You're describing your solution to the problem, that highlights your innovation. And also typically you're describing the limitations of the current solutions, which demonstrates your commercial potential of why someone might choose your innovation over what's currently available. You're going to be introducing your company and team. This talks to the team and environment. You're providing those qualifications. And then your approach here is represented by the specific aims that you're drafting. So what are the key product development pathway steps that you're going to achieve in this particular application or this particular project? So some pointers for specific aims. You should really set your specific aims early as they outline your scope of work, and again, will influence your budget, how much you can allocate to a sub-award if you're going to have a sub-award, and how much you might allocate to consultants or other collaborators. And we always recommend, if possible, you should discuss your specific aims very early on with a program officer to make sure that they're in line with the institute's priorities and funding or funding priorities for this SBIR mechanism. Also, they should be aligned with your product development pathway. And again, keeping the budget considerations in mind. So you're not going to be able to get in one shot from prototype to market with an SBIR at NIH. And again, your aims should represent a logical approach to completing each specific milestone that you're laying out. And your job is to convince the reviewers that this is the pathway for your particular product, and this is what needs to be done for your particular product. Again, usually for phase 1, this is often achieving proof of concept. So if you're developing a therapeutic, usually reviewers will want to see in vivo preclinical proof of concept by the end, versus a device, whether that is proof of feasibility by the end, or having a prototype that meets specific metrics at the end of the project. Each aim should be its own critical step of product development. And again, should have very clear, quantifiable, measurable metrics of success. Okay. So let's take a sip. All right. So you might be asking yourself, all right, I'm pretty okay with the approach. I understand what I need to do there, but how am I demonstrating commercial potential? So first, you want to determine your competitive advantage. And the way that you do this with small business grants is really think about what is currently on the market. How does your innovation compare to that? What differences are there between what you're developing and what is currently available? Again, ask yourself, why would someone choose to use your innovation over something that they can already buy or use without waiting, however many years it's going to take to get from proof of concept to market? Also, does your innovation meet a critical unmet need? So if you go to a physician who treats patients with a particular disease, are they going to care that, let's say you have a product that helps to clear congestion among a myriad of symptoms? Is congestion really the most significant unmet need for that patient population? In some cases, yes. In others, maybe not. And also, do you understand your competition? Do you understand what is coming up in the pipeline? What is also being funded? So here you can use like NIH Reporter or clinicaltrials.gov to figure out what is being studied currently in the same space that you are in. You also want to determine your business model. And even if you're just starting out with a phase 1, this is very, very important because you want to kind of weave in this, this information throughout even a phase 1 application at NIH. So for example, who's your customer? Who's going to be your end user? Sometimes your customer and end user are going to be the same person, sometimes not. So for example, if your customer are physicians or hospitals, the end user is most likely going to be patient. How do you plan to market and sell your innovation? It's not going to be enough to just say like, okay, I have a drug. You need to know, how are you going to get that drug through clinical trials? Do you need to get FDA approval? And does your team have that necessary experience or expertise to ensure that these commercial outcomes are going to be met? And also determine your path to market, which might be different than regulatory, or this can include regulatory approval. So if you're developing a therapeutic, do you need to get IND approval? Are there ways that you can help speed up that process? If you do need to get regulatory approval, what's your path through? Also, something really important to consider, how are you protecting your intellectual property, your IP? How do you make sure you're not encroaching on someone else's IP? Also, if you're thinking about something really important to consider if you're coming from a university is, does the university own that IP? If so, and you're using that IP as a small business, how is that going to work out? You're going to need to make sure that you're talking to your tech transfer office to make sure that everyone's on the same page with where IP is going, like future IP is going to reside, whether it's going to stay at the university or whether new IP belongs to the company. All of these components are very important, even again, if you're just starting out. So within your application, how do you demonstrate this? So basically, you want to kind of throw this everywhere. So for example, for your significance, you'll be talking about this in your research plan and commercialization plan. Again, this is going to be very NIH specific. So commercialization plan, this is something that basically is your business plan that you are required to provide in your phase 2 application. But you will describe what is the unmet need that you're targeting. What are, again, those limitations to current solutions? What is the market demand? Is there market growth? Is this something that is going to continue to be a problem that needs a solution? For your innovation, there's a specific section in your research plan for innovation and also in your commercialization plan. And this is one of those big differentiators between an R1 and a small business application. Innovation here is that competitive advantage. What makes your solution different from what is currently available, and why are those differences key? Why are they crucial? Why are they necessary to be addressing? Again, in your innovation section, you might discuss your business model. So for example, who's going to be your first set of customers or your first end users that you're targeting? For example, if you're developing a therapeutic that has broad potential for a variety of disorders, what is the first disorder that you're going to target? Because you're not going to be able to target all of them at first. How are you going to get through your regulatory pathway? What is that path to market? How are you protecting your IP? Often we encourage our clients to state specifically, if they have an IP lawyer, to specifically name them in their application, just so that reviewers see that they have already thought through this, are in the process of protecting their IP and reviewing the that IP landscape. For investigators, this you can outline in commercialization plan with bio sketches and letters of support. You can highlight business expertise, regulatory expertise, basically just expertise in general, right? So clinical, project-specific expertise. So this is if you're working in a particular type of, let's say AI ML, right? So someone who has that machine learning, artificial intelligence expertise on the team, that you're not needing to build that expertise from ground up. You can have someone commenting on your business model, potential investor, indicating that, yeah, there is a market for this, even if they don't need to be a current investor. It could just be someone that is interested in your project once it gets to a certain point. You can also have letters from your tech transfer office highlighting how you're planning to navigate IP in the future. An environment. So again, bio sketches, letters of support, and supplemental documents. These are very important to demonstrate that you have the necessary resources. And a key difference here is that maybe these resources include entrepreneurial mentoring. So do you have someone at, for example, if you're part of an incubator space, do you have someone there who can provide path to market guidance or business guidance? Especially if like the PI of these applications doesn't necessarily have that experience. It's also really important that you use the resources available to you. So, for example, small business development centers, university innovation centers, or university technology transfer offices. There's also something that academic-based small business owners might not have a lot of familiarity with is just running a business, right? Identifying who your customer base might be. And so there are a variety of boot camps or innovation core available to small businesses. So NIH just recently announced this entrepreneurship boot camp for pre-SBIR STTR innovators. So here, this would be prior to receiving an SBIR grant. And so it's to provide that entrepreneurship mentoring prior to getting or writing that first award. Innovation Core, both NSF and NIH have a version of this. For NSF, this is pre-award, so you do not need an active SBIR, STTR award in order to participate. However, at NIH, you need to have an active award to participate in NIH's Innovation Core. And then there are also commercialization enhancement programs, for example, here at NSF and NIH. And again, these all link to these websites for more information. Specifically to small business grants, there's also this additional funding pot of money that you can apply for that's called Technical and Business Assistance, or TABA. Typically, you can get this, you can ask for it in your budget, in your application. So for phase 1, you can request up to $6,500, and for phase 2, up to $50,000 of TABA support. For NIH, this can be both. You can propose like, oh, I know that I need help with market research, so here's someone that I'm going to work with to help me with that. So you can propose it in your budget, or you can have this post-award version where you're working with an NIH assigned vendor who will essentially conduct a gap analysis for your product and your company to help you identify what you need to work on and how you can advance towards commercialization. And what you need in terms of your business plan, your business model, really varies, again, by your phase. So at NIH, phase 1, you don't really need to have all of the details of your business plan at that point, but phase 2, you do, because you have that commercialization plan. NSF phase 1, a good chunk of that application is really about what is your market, who's your customer, have you done customer discovery, all that sort of thing. And so all of these commercialization or commercial potential requirements differ based on phase, can also differ based on solicitation, and does differ based on agency. So always read the solicitation. Okay, so next we're gonna talk about the responsibilities of the small business. So if you have an academic background, you may just be familiar with preparing the documents required for your application. As the small business, though, for these grants, you are the prime applicant, meaning the small business is the submitting applicant. So your university may provide support, but they may not. So you need to be ready for what needs to happen. First, you need to make sure that you're meeting the small business definition, you're meeting ownership requirements. And the Small Business Association defines a small business as having fewer than 500 employees, which that's how they define it. And also you need to be for profit. The small business needs to have a set of registrations in place before you can submit. So you really need to start now. Strongly encourage you to start now if you're thinking about that September NIH deadline. One of the first ones is that you need to have, the small business needs to have its own EIN, TIN from the IRS. You then also need to obtain what's called a unique entity ID from SAM.gov, and this needs to be an active registration. Just getting this UEI, this ID from SAM.gov is not enough. You need to actually submit and submit that registration and application and get that registration activated. You also will need a grants.gov account specifically for your small business. You'll also need to register with the Small Business Administration. And then there are a variety of agency-specific requirements. So for example, registering your small business in ERA Commons for NIH, DSIP for DoD, ProSAMS for NASA, or research.gov for NSF. So while you as a PI or an academic may have, say, an ERA Commons account, your small business will also need to have an ERA Commons account. So other responsibilities include systematically preparing, assembling, and reviewing all of the required documents for the application, and this includes establishing subawards. Some of you may have experience with working as a subaward with someone else, and so you might be familiar with some of that process, but if you do plan to have a subaward or a partnering research institution with your application, you really need to be on top and start early, because that process can often take 4 to 6+ weeks to get through all of the institutional requirements. So here I have a list of some of the most common required documents for an NIH SBIR application. And again, budget is itself a beast, and Brandon will be talking about that with you all in the next webinar. And again, for subawards, here are some of the most common documents that you really should include in your application if you're doing a subaward. You'll also be responsible for submitting your application, which oftentimes universities take care of for you. And there's a reason why they have someone to do this for you, because it is complex sometimes, oftentimes. So with NIH, they have Assist, and so you may not be familiar with Assist, and you have all of these tabs at the top that need to have information that needs to be answered, and you also need to make sure that your application doesn't have any errors. You'll want to make sure that you're previewing it to make sure everything is uploaded properly. It's a lot of steps. Typically for people who are just starting out and with submission, we recommend between at least 1 to 5 hours just dedicated to answering information in Assist, getting your documents uploaded, and checking for errors. NIH does provide, and all of the other agencies will provide resources for the portal that you need to submit through, but here I'm providing some resources for NIH. So on top of submission, you'll also be responsible for handling what's called just-in-time, or that pre-award phase. And again, typically your university usually handles this. So this might be getting your IACUC approval or IRB approval in place prior to receiving that award. These are things that aren't necessary for you to have at time of submission, but you will need before the granting agency will give you the money to do the work. Consider the just-in-time pre-award phase, getting all of your ducks in a row so that once you get the money, you can hit the ground running. Like, you don't need to spend that time getting everything set up, like getting IRB approval prior to being able to start. At this point, your small business will also need to verify that it has different assurances and certifications in place. So, for example, animal welfare, or human protection training. And then also, if you have a subaward, finalizing that consortium, and then ensuring that you're meeting any employment requirements. So, for example, SBIR, having the PI primarily employed at the company at that time. And then there are a whole bunch of reports that you're going to be responsible for. So progress report, as coming from an academic background, you might be familiar with this already, but there are a bunch of other reports the university likely takes care of, including financials and compliance reports, and also most likely misconduct reports. As a small business, as the applying entity, you now become responsible for all of this. Okay, so before we get into Q&A, here are some last minute tips. If you haven't already, start your registrations now. SAM.gov, not having your UEI active is one of the #1 reasons small businesses do not apply in time or at the deadline that they're aiming for. If you do not have your UEI, you can't apply, or you can't register your company in grants.gov, and you need grants.gov to submit your application. So if you're considering start now, that SAM registration's active for a year. You will need to renew it each year, but if you get it out of the way right now, you won't have to worry about it for a bit. Always read the solicitation, understand any special needs for that particular solicitation, understand what you need for submission versus what you'll need at time of award. Again, so if you're working with animals, you'll need to have that for animals document in place, outlining what you're planning to do with the animals, but you won't need IACUC approval until time of award. You'll also want to talk to program staff as early as possible to determine whether the project that you're interested in proposing fits within their funding priorities. Also strongly encourage you to plan to submit early. The process is often complicated. Portals go down, people lose electricity. You also want to make sure that you know all of your passwords, that you have your passwords handy. You end up needing quite a few of them, specifically for NIH in order to submit. Again, if you're planning to have collaborators, or if you have potential investors who might be willing to write a letter of support for you, or if you need someone to serve as a consultant for whatever reason to help fill in that expertise gap, you want to contact them early to get those external documents, those external resources back as soon as possible. So you can control what you're doing, but you cannot control what other people are doing. So if you give them as much time as possible, then it makes it more likely that you're going to get what you need from them. And also make sure you're starting early. These are very in-depth application processes. You want to make sure that you're answering the solicitations as carefully and completely as possible. So giving yourself as much time as possible is always best practice. Okay, so thank you guys for listening. We now have some time available for questions. And I do also want to point out on the back of this slide, NIH does provide some sample applications specifically for these SBIR applications. So if you're interested in seeing some of these, I've included some links here. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and end my slideshow and stop sharing and open up for questions. And yes, the recording and slides will be being shared. Okay. Sorry, I see Priya's been answering questions in the chat. I'm just trying to find one that hasn't been.
Chelcie, it looks like at the bottom, there's some questions regarding, can you talk a bit about EGC manages the funds and how are you compensated?
So we do have a dedicated team of accountants and CPAs at EGC. So it's not, so I'm a scientific consultant grant writing specialist. It is not me. I'm not the numbers person who would be managing that for you, but we do have people who are on top of all of the compliance issues that you need to be aware of for small businesses. And so they help you draw down your funds for each month, and they may also help you with, so at a certain point, once you've received, I believe it's $750,000 in federal funds, you need to have an audit of where that money is going each year. And so our team can help you with that. In terms of engaging with EGC, I think we actually might have someone from our sales team down here. Delilah, I think, might be here. And so, yeah, hey, Delilah. Okay. You can always reach out to us. So again, on the last slide of my presentation, you can check us out at evagarland.com and schedule a time to talk to one of our sales representatives to learn more about the services that we offer. Oh, okay. you mentioned the need for in vivo preclinical data. Is it after phase 2? So for phase 1, you're at NIH, you're not required to have preliminary data. But it always obviously helps, and you do want to make sure that you are providing the scientific justification and rationale for the project that you're proposing. So typically by the end of a phase 1, if you're developing a therapeutic, you might want to have at least demonstrating proof of concept or proof of feasibility in an in vivo animal model by the end of your phase 1.
There's another question. It says we're licensing an intervention from a university and plan to partner with them for phase 2/1 grant. What documents do we need for the university scientific other than a letter of support?
So if the university owns the IP, it's really good practice to speak with your tech transfer office and make sure. So for example, what's common is that the small business might have what's called exclusive licensing rights, so that no other entity is able to use that IP, and it'll still belong to the university, but your small business has the ability to keep working on and use that IP. It's also really good practice, again, as I mentioned earlier in my talk, to establish where will any new IP that's generated from these applications, where is that going to reside? And so having those talks and those conversations early on is really good practice, and you can have a letter of support from your tech transfer office to that effect, right? That you've engaged with them, you do indeed have exclusive rights to exclusive rights to license the IP, and that you've had that conversation of any IP from this project would become the company's IP, and any other issues that might come up. Also, if you have a patent lawyer, it's that I know they can be very expensive, but especially if you need to make sure that you're not encroaching on someone else's IP, and also understanding how best to protect your own IP, it is really encouraged to try to get someone in on that process as early on as well. Minimum size requirement, yeah. So as Priya's mentioning, you don't you can have just one employee, right? Like there's no minimum size for small business, but there is a maximum size, as Priya indicates here, 500. And yeah, Delilah and Priya are providing some information on how to contact us. If you're interested, let's see. Also, if there's a question, because there's so many in here that hasn't been answered, please feel free to drop it again so that it pops up. Small businesses with one employee who were funded through all phases. Typically not through all phases with only one person, because usually by the time you get to phase 2, you really want to show that you're scaling up, and that scale up process includes hiring more people, and part of your commercialization plan for an NIH phase 2 includes specifically, there's a question like what sort of personnel do you need in order to move forward. Also, you want to make sure, sometimes we'll see reviewers comment on not having people working on the project but not employed at the company, particularly at those later stages, because it shows by having people employed at the company, it shows that institutional commitment, and that that you have the expertise internally, if that makes sense. So with phase 1, you may get by with only having one employee, but usually by phase 2, you're gonna want to have a few more at least, and again, even having someone with like a letter of support that states, I'm willing to come on once you guys have funding, but you kind of need that money in place before you can hire more people. You can also include in your budget, like, to be hired, and that's sufficient as well. How frequently, so do you, I'm going to interpret this as how frequently does EGC communicate a review with the agency or the small business? So for NIH, they're very open to allowing PIs reach out and have a discussion at any time, and we strongly encourage you to reach out as early as possible. And then anytime you receive your summary statement, reach out. Those are like two very key moments that you want to reach out prior to applying, prior to like starting to draft your entire application. And then once you get your summary statement of reviewer comments, but certainly any time between discussing your specific aims to submission, your PO will probably want you to wait for your summary statement to come out before it'll talk to you again. But yeah, anytime prior to submission and after getting your summary statement. Top 3 things that will give an application a greater chance of success. And things that will tank the application. Okay, so specificity, making sure you have a very solid, clearly described plan, greatly improves your chance. If it's very vague, if reviewers can't understand what you're trying to do, that is a mark against. And then having very clearly defined milestones versus just saying we're aiming for statistical significance. You really want to show also if you have something that you can benchmark against, particularly if it's a competitor and you're trying to show that your product is better, showing that is always great. Third thing, making sure that you have a team that fulfills all of any gap that the internal team doesn't have. So for example, if you're trying to have a clinical study or a clinical trial, it's really strongly encouraged that you have someone that has a biostatistical background to help you with that complex data set. And so then also conversely, not having that team. And so oftentimes you'll also see reviewers asking for like someone who has that clinical background for NIH specifically, to have that clinical background on the team as well to kind of help with the guidance. Okay, once awarded and in phase 1, how frequently would need, so very okay, sorry. Yeah, so there is that yearly progress report, and you're welcome to probably communicate with your PO as often as you need to. Something else that you might want to communicate to your PO is if you need to kind of change your, if you need to deviate from, much like you would with an academic grant, if for whatever reason your aim 1 is telling you that the results from aim 1 indicate that you need to go in direction C instead of direction B, and it's a vastly different scope of work than what you proposed, you really want to reach out to them and talk to them about that. And anytime that you have like any changes in your budget, you'll want to make sure, like if you need to reallocate some funds, you'll want to reach out as well.